The flight line at the Cold Lake Air Base in Alberta sits under a clear October sky at dawn. The temperature reads -3 degrees Celsius. 2 rows of fighter aircraft sit on the apron, canopies closed, ground crews moving between them with the unhurried precision of people who have done this every morning for years. The aircraft are not American. They are not F-35s. They are not the platform that the Royal Canadian Air Force had been expected to purchase for 15 years. The platform that American defense planners had treated as a foregone conclusion. The platform written into joint North American defense assumptions for over a decade. The aircraft on the apron at Cold Lake are Swedish Gripens and French Rafales, the first deliveries of a new Canadian fighter fleet sourced entirely from European manufacturers. The senior aircraft maintenance officer at Cold Lake, a Canadian chief warrant officer with 33 years in the Royal Canadian Air Force, said something to a visiting parliamentary defense committee at the start of the morning brief that no senior Canadian Air Force technician had ever said on the record before. For my entire career, I assumed the next fighter we flew would be American, he said. Every officer I ever served under assumed it. As of this contract, that assumption is dead. We are flying European now. And the strangest part is, we did not choose to leave the Americans. The Americans told us to leave. That is the sound of a $19 billion mistake. And it began with a single sentence delivered at a defense event in Fort Worth, Texas. The setting was a celebration at the F-35 final assembly facility, the kind of event the president attended when he wanted to be photographed in front of fighter jets. A reporter from a Canadian defense publication asked a careful question about the status of the long-delayed Canadian F-35 procurement, given 18 months of trade hostility and Canada's recent decision to review all major American defense purchases. The president stood in front of a row of completed aircraft. He took the microphone off the stand. The answer left the script almost immediately. Canada, he said, was lucky they were even offered the F-35, the greatest fighter jet ever built. Nothing else came close. The Europeans built garbage. The French built garbage. The Swedes built little toy planes. And Canada got to buy the best aircraft in the history of aviation and was dragging its feet, reviewing, negotiating, acting like it was doing America a favor. Maybe Canada should fly their little Swedish toys and see how that worked out when something came over the pole. He went further. They controlled that airplane, he said. They controlled the software, the parts, the upgrades. If Canada ever stepped out of line, if Carney ever played games, they could ground the entire Canadian fleet from a computer in Texas, turn those planes into lawn ornaments. So Canada had better be grateful, very grateful, that America was willing to sell them an airplane they could shut off whenever they wanted. Canada had no choice, no alternative. By Tuesday, Canada would come crawling back to sign. Watch. The words were captured by every camera in the Fort Worth facility and aired live across Canadian morning newscasts. They were transcribed and forwarded to every member of the Canadian Defense Procurement Review Board within 40 minutes. The remark about grounding the Canadian fleet from a computer in Texas was clipped, isolated, and replayed on Canadian news networks within the hour. A retired Canadian Air Force general appeared on a national broadcast before noon and said that in 40 years of service he had never heard an American leader publicly describe a defense partnership as a kill switch. The Federal Minister of National Defense issued a statement before 2 in the afternoon. Grateful, lawn ornaments, they will come crawling back. These were not the words of a defense partner. They were the words of a man who had publicly described an allied nation's air force as hostage to a computer in Texas. He had never read a fighter procurement sovereignty clause, never sat through a briefing on source code escrow, never understood the difference between a foreign military sale and a sovereign capability, never grasped that the single greatest concern of every air force on the planet purchasing American aircraft was precisely the dependency he had just bragged about on a stage. He had said the quiet part aloud. He had confirmed in public the exact fear that European competitors had spent 2 decades selling against. Within 72 hours, the response came. Not 72 days, not 72 weeks, 72 hours. The response did not come from Carney directly. It came from a press conference held in the rotunda of National Defense Headquarters in Ottawa, with the Minister of National Defense at the center podium, the Chief of the Defense Staff to his right, the Minister of Public Services and Procurement to his left, and the chief executives of two European aerospace consortia seated in the front row beside the ambassadors of Sweden and France. Carney was not at the podium. He had remained at his office specifically so that the announcement would land as a sovereign procurement decision executed through the proper ministers, not as a personal reaction to an insult. The Minister of National Defense read from a single sheet of paper. The Government of Canada had concluded its review of the Future Fighter Capability Project. Canada would not proceed with the acquisition of the American F-35 Lightning. Canada would instead acquire a mixed fleet of 88 aircraft, comprising Swedish Gripen E platforms and French Rafale platforms, under a procurement framework that included full source code access, sovereign software control, domestic maintenance and upgrade authority, and Canadian aerospace industrial participation. The total program value was approximately $19 billion. The decision had been made on the basis of capability, cost, industrial benefit, and sovereignty. The sovereignty consideration was decisive. Canada would not operate a primary air defense capability that could be controlled, restricted, or disabled by any foreign government, ally, or otherwise. He paused. He looked directly at the lead camera. He said, "The President of the United States stated publicly that the American government could ground the Canadian fighter fleet from a computer in Texas. We thank him for the clarity. He has confirmed, in his own words, exactly why no nation should purchase a primary defense capability it cannot independently control. Canada has heard him. Canada has acted accordingly." The Swedish ambassador spoke next. She confirmed that the Gripen procurement framework included unrestricted source code access and full Canadian sovereign control over the aircraft's operational software. The French ambassador confirmed the same terms for the Rafale and announced the establishment of a Rafale maintenance and assembly facility in Quebec. The Chief of the Defense Staff did not speak. He stood at parade rest in dress uniform and let the two foreign ambassadors deliver the message that the most senior officer in the Canadian Armed Forces had endorsed without a word. The damage landed in 4 American states simultaneously. In Fort Worth, the defense contractor that manufactured the F-35 received formal notification that the Canadian order, 88 aircraft with a program value the contractor had internally projected at over $19 billion across the aircraft, sustainment, parts, and upgrade life cycle, had been canceled in its entirety. The contractor had treated the Canadian order as a near certainty for 15 years. The notification arrived as a single diplomatic note delivered to the company's government relations office. The senior vice president for the Canadian program, a man named Gene who had spent 29 years in American defense aerospace, sat in his office and read the note twice. He had personally led the Canadian campaign for 11 years. He had flown to Ottawa 47 times. He had built relationships with Canadian Air Force officers spanning 2 decades. "We did not lose this on the airplane," he told a Fort Worth business publication, voice flat. "The F-35 is a superior platform on most measures, and everyone in this industry knows it. We lost this because the President went on a stage in this very city and told the Canadians out loud that we could shut their airplanes off. There is not a sovereign nation on earth that will buy a fighter after hearing that. He did not just lose us, Canada. He may have lost us every undecided customer on the planet. I have spent my career selling the idea that buying American means buying trust. He stood in front of our airplanes and told the world that buying American means buying a kill switch. I do not know how we sell against that now." In Marietta, Georgia, an American aerospace supplier that manufactured major structural components for the F-35 learned that the cancellation of the Canadian order, combined with Canadian industrial offset provisions that had been part of the original F-35 framework, would eliminate approximately $610 million in projected revenue. The supplier suspended a planned facility expansion. 440 Georgia aerospace jobs were affected. In Nashua, New Hampshire, a defense electronics firm that produced sensor and avionics subsystems for the F-35 learned that its Canadian work had been cancelled and that the European replacement aircraft would source equivalent systems from European and Canadian suppliers under the sovereignty provisions of the new contract. The firm's program director, a man named Daniel, whose father had built avionics for American fighters during the Cold War, told a regional defense publication, "My father built the brains for airplanes that defended this continent. I was supposed to build the brains for the airplanes that would defend it next. Tonight the Canadians are buying European brains with European source code that no American computer can touch. And they are buying them because our own president told them to be afraid of us. I am not angry at the Canadians. They did the only rational thing. I am angry at the man who handed them the reason." In Palmdale, California, an aerospace facility that had expected to perform depot-level maintenance and upgrade work on the Canadian F-35 fleet over its multi-decade service life, learned that all such work would now be performed in Canada and Europe under the sovereign maintenance provisions of the new contract. The facility canceled a planned hiring expansion. 370 California aerospace maintenance jobs were lost. The facility's general manager, a woman named Marie with 26 years in defense aerospace sustainment, told a California labor publication, "We build the longest, deepest, most profitable relationships in this industry through sustainment. You sell the airplane once. You maintain it for 40 years. We just lost 40 years of Canadian sustainment work in a single afternoon because the president bragged about a capability that every customer fears. I am not angry. I am stunned. There is a difference." The scale of the loss was deeper and more strategically consequential than the initial procurement notice had suggested. The Canadian Future Fighter program was valued at approximately $19 billion for aircraft acquisition alone, with life cycle sustainment, parts, and upgrades pushing the total program value toward $70 billion. The F-35 program depended on a global network of partner nations to spread development and sustainment costs, and the loss of Canada increased per-unit costs for every remaining customer. The single greatest selling proposition of American defense exports had always been reliability. The single greatest fear of every American defense customer had always been dependency, the worry that American political volatility could one day be leveraged against a sovereign air force. For 15 years, American salesmanship had worked to suppress that fear. In a single speech in Fort Worth, the president had confirmed it. This is a structural realignment of the global fighter aircraft market that will reverberate through American defense exports for a generation. The Canadian decision had been studied since 2022. The sovereignty concerns had been documented in classified defense assessments for years. The European bids had been refined, the source code provisions negotiated, the Quebec assembly facility planned, all sitting in folders marked only with date fields, waiting. The moment was provided by Fort Worth. The folders opened. The human cost accumulated in ways that no procurement document captures. In Cold Lake, Alberta, a Canadian fighter pilot named Pierre had spent 14 years flying the aging fleet the new aircraft were replacing. He had grown up outside Quebec City. He had 2 children in a French-language school on the base. His wife taught at the same school. He had assumed for his entire career that he would eventually transition to the F-35. He had visited American training facilities. He had friends in the United States Air Force. He had expected to fly an American aircraft for the second half of his career. On the morning the European decision was announced, his squadron commander gathered the pilots in the briefing room and told them they would be transitioning to the Gripens and the Rafale. He told them the new aircraft came with full Canadian software control, that no foreign government could restrict or ground the fleet, that maintenance and upgrades would be performed by Canadian hands on Canadian soil. Pierre told a Radio Canada reporter that afternoon in French with his flight suit still on, "I have American friends in this business, good pilots, good people. I always thought I would fly beside them in the same airplane. The man in Washington took that away. He stood on a stage and said he could turn my airplane off from a computer in Texas. I cannot fly an airplane someone in another country can turn off. No pilot can. He did not insult Canada. He insulted the idea that an ally is an ally. I am not angry at the Americans. I am sad for them. Their president just told the world not to trust them. I will fly a Swedish airplane now. It is a good airplane, and nobody in another country can ever switch it off. In Montreal, Quebec, an aerospace engineer named Marie had spent 12 years working in the Canadian aerospace sector, much of it on subcontracting work tied to American defense programs. She had been laid off twice during downturns when American programs shifted work to American facilities. On the morning the European decision was announced, her employer informed the workforce that the new Rafale assembly and maintenance facility would be located in Quebec, that it would employ an estimated 940 workers over the next 5 years, and that the work, unlike the American subcontracting that had come and gone with American political winds, would be permanent, sovereign, and Canadian-controlled. I have been laid off twice because American programs decided to keep the work in America, she told a Montreal newspaper. I do not blame them. It was their work. But I learned not to build my career on it, because it could vanish when their politics changed. The new airplane is European and the work is Canadian, and nobody in Washington can take it away from me when their president has a bad day. The man in Texas called our work garbage. He called the French airplane garbage. That garbage just gave my city 900 jobs that cannot be canceled by a computer in Texas. I will take the garbage. The garbage is mine. The political fractures inside the United States arrived from a direction the administration had not expected. They came from the American defense establishment itself. The senior United States Senator from Texas, a Republican who had supported the administration on every defense vote for 3 years, issued a statement within 5 days that broke a decade of internal party discipline. The F-35 program was among the most important defense manufacturing efforts in his state and in the nation. By publicly describing the ability to disable an Allied Air Force from American soil, the President had confirmed the single greatest fear of every potential foreign customer for American military aircraft. The loss of the Canadian order was severe. The damage to American credibility as a reliable defense partner was far more severe. 3 former Secretaries of Defense, 2 Republican and 1 Democrat, issued a joint statement the following week. In their combined service, they had worked to assure allied nations that purchasing American defense equipment meant joining a partnership of trust. The remarks delivered in Fort Worth had undermined that assurance in a manner that would require years to repair. Allied confidence in American defense reliability was a strategic asset more valuable than any single contract. That asset had been damaged. Over 4 weeks of cost estimates, a coalition of American defense industry analysts projected that the canceled Canadian order, the lost life cycle sustainment revenue, the eliminated supplier work, and the projected loss of other undecided foreign customers reconsidering American platforms in light of the Fort Worth remarks, would cost the American defense aerospace industry approximately $19 billion in the near term, with life cycle and reputational costs reaching far higher over the coming decade. $19 billion because a president stood in front of fighter jets and bragged that he could turn off an ally's air force. Beyond the dollar figures, something had shifted that would not appear on any procurement report. The Fort Worth remarks had taught every potential foreign buyer of American defense equipment that the dependency they feared was real, acknowledged, and could be wielded as a threat by an American president on a stage. They had taught Ottawa that sovereignty over a primary defense capability was worth more than the superior performance of an aircraft someone else controlled. They had taught Stockholm and Paris that the strongest sales argument against American fighters was now being made, free of charge, by the American president himself. European manufacturers had spent 2 decades arguing that buying American meant surrendering control. They had never had a more effective spokesman for that argument than the man standing in Fort Worth. The president said Canada was lucky to be offered the F-35. Canada bought European aircraft that no American computer can ever disable. The president said America could ground the Canadian fleet from a computer in Texas. Canada heard him and bought a fleet specifically because it cannot be grounded from any computer anywhere. The president said Canada would come crawling back by Tuesday to sign. By Tuesday, the Gripens and Rafales were already on the apron at Cold Lake, and the F-35 contract was a canceled diplomatic note in a filing cabinet in Fort Worth. He tried to make Canada feel dependent, Canada bought independence instead. He tried to call European aircraft garbage. The garbage came with something the F-35 could not offer, which was the certainty that no foreign hand could ever switch it off. He tried to humiliate an ally in front of a row of fighter jets. The humiliation traveled in the opposite direction, paid in a canceled $19 billion program in Fort Worth, suspended expansions in Marietta, eliminated avionics work in Nashua, lost sustainment jobs in Palmdale, and a credibility wound across the entire American defense export industry that no single contract could measure. While 2 rows of European aircraft sat on the apron at Cold Lake under a clear Alberta sky, Canadian-controlled, Canadian-maintained, and impossible from any computer in any state in America to ever turn off.